You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. For 15 years, 3 to 4 shows a week, 10 to 15 to 20 shows a week. What is it? 2 to 3 shows a weekday, and we're doing about 4 now, and 10 to 15 a week. We're bringing you the Chris Voss Show, the billionaires, the CEOs, the Pulitzer Prize winners, the people who advise presidents, the astronauts, the brilliant authors that just come with their newest, hottest books right off the shelf. They're so hot, you can still get high off the ink. Do people still do that now? You can't do that with the Kindles, people, but you can try. And we bring the brain bleed. And of course, little old me. I'm just the dumbass that shows up on the show with a mic and tells the story. And we have all the great people that come on and share the intelligence. And we have another on today. And as always, we're going to be talking a little bit about history. You're going to learn some stuff today, people, because as we always say on the show, this is a direct Chris Voss quote. The one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. Thereby, we go round and round, my friends. So it's important to learn history and know history. And of course, some of the most interesting people are in history. Because I don't know, the politicians and people nowadays are kind of boring. They just all seem to be little robber barons or whatever. But maybe they weren't that different in the old days. So we're going to get into it. But in the meantime, we would appreciate and love you forever. The Chris Voss Show is a family that loves you but doesn't judge you. But if you want to get even more love, if you want to enter the realm of loviness of the Chris Voss Show, please refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, and Chris Voss 1 on the Tickety Talkie, where all those kids are doing the dancing and stuff, and somewhere we're on there trying to be relevant, but it's of course not working. Okay, boomer. I'm Gen X. Anyway, we have an amazing gentleman on the show. He's written a host of just a plethora, not just a host, but a plethora of an amazing books of history and figures in history and everything else. I'm just going to be delving into his history books after the show because there's a bunch that we talked about in the pre-show I want to read. Richard Aldous joins us on the show with us today, and his latest book just came out October 2nd, yesterday, 2023. Congratulations, Richard. His newest book is called The Dillon Era, Douglas Dillon in the Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson administrations. We'll be talking to him about this amazing history, this interesting man, and what we can learn from him and what we can probably learn not from him, because man never learns from his history. See what I did there? I fell back to that thing. Richard Aldous is a historian of British and American politics and culture. His 10 books include, and along with 3 co-edited, Schlesinger, The Imperial Historian, Reagan and Thatcher, The Difficult Relationship, Macmillan, Eisenhower and the Cold War, and a dual biography of Gladstone and Disraeli, lives of Malcolm Sargent and Tony Ryan, and most recently, the new book, The Dillon Era. He teaches at Bard University, where he's the Eugene Meyer Professor of British History and Culture. He is a founding member of the editorial team at the American Purpose magazine and presents its weekly Book Stack podcast. I'm going to check into that. He writes regularly for publications including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, has made numerous appearances on CNN, Spectrum News, Fox News, the BBC, RTE, and other broadcasts. And he's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society. I feel like I need to say that in a British accent. And now he reaches the pinnacle of his appearances on media on the Chris Voss Show podcast. Welcome to the show, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I'm strapped in and I'm ready to go.
There you go. All right. Well, sounds good then. It's not an OnlyFans show. Keep that in mind. I don't know what that means. But thank you, Richard, for coming. amzn.to, and we'll so people can look you up on the interwebs.
So the best place to find me is at Bard, which is bard.edu. As you mentioned, I also host the Book Stack podcast for AmericanPurpose.com. So
There
either
you
of
go.
those places, that's where I am.
You're strapped into the roller coaster of the Chris Voss Show, ready for the brain bleed to come out of you. See, I can't even pronounce stuff. I've brain bled so much for all the amazing knowledge that folks like yourself put these books together. So give us a 30,000 overview of this new book, The Dillon Era.
So this is the story of Douglas Dillon, who's the Treasury Secretary in the Kennedy administration. So far, you might think, okay, pretty ordinary politician. What makes him interesting is that he was a Republican in a Democratic administration.
Oh, wow.
He'd also been in the Eisenhower administration, where he'd been at the State Department. In 1960, Kennedy goes up against Nixon. No one's quite sure who's going to win, but everyone thinks that if Nixon wins, they're going to give Dillon the Secretary of State job. Nixon loses, Kennedy comes in, and Kennedy offers him the Treasury Secretary. So he's an interesting character because we don't live in a particularly bipartisan age. Douglas Dillon is the quintessential bipartisan politician.
There you go. Works for Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. So 3 different administrations. And he's a Republican. I can't remember, was Eisenhower a Republican? I think he was, right?
Yeah, so Eisenhower's a Republican, and then Kennedy's a Democrat, and Johnson's a Democrat too. So he works for one Republican administration and 2 Democratic ones.
There you go. And we need people like this that work in our governments that aren't so much bipartisan, but people that just kind of keep the wheels chugging along. So who was this guy? Give us a background on who was he and how did he get positioned to be in these administrations?
Yeah, so he is the son of a man called Clarence Dillon, who runs Dillon Reed, kind of on Wall Street. And Clarence Dillon is one of the 50 richest Americans, so a billionaire by today's
Wow.
money. And when young Douglas is growing up, it's pretty much that Clarence sees him as his banking heir, that he's going to run the firm, he's going to be on Wall Street, and that's what he does throughout the 30s and the 40s. Obviously, he, like so many of the greatest generation, he goes away and fights during the war. But then it is not enough for him being on Wall Street, that he doesn't just want to be living in this very constrained environment. He wants to do something else with his life, and that's politics. And he's very lucky because, most people, if they want to go into politics, they have to work their way up the system, climb up the ladder. But his father was a major donor to Eisenhower in 1952. He was a close friend of John Foster Dulles, who was Eisenhower's closest advisor. And as so often happens in the American political tradition, ambassadorships are one of the ways in which you reward your biggest donors. So Eisenhower offers the ambassadorship to Paris, to France, to Douglas Dillon, and that is his first political job. So he goes off to Paris, where he's ambassador, and with John Foster Dulles installed as Secretary of State. So he always has his protector there at the highest level.
There you go. Did he come up through Wall Street in the same era that Joe Kennedy did?
So he's younger than Joe Kennedy. That is when kind of Kennedy is around, and Clarence Dillon would be roughly a contemporary of Joe Kennedy. The relationship that Dillon later has with John F. Kennedy, I think partly comes out of this kind of shared background that both of their fathers were millionaires. Both of their fathers were quite let's say, had quite sharp elbows. They weren't afraid to be rough when they needed to be. They were both kind of players in the financial world. But then the sons had both been to Harvard around the same time. They'd both gone into politics. So there's a lot of similarities. And it's one of the things that Jackie Kennedy said was that Dillon was the only friend that Kennedy had in his cabinet. He was the only person that the Kennedys saw socially.
Wow, that's amazing. So he was a man of all sort of things. I know that in the Kennedy administration, they were lambasted for being this new sort of generation of college-educated men. and kind of more brainiacs, if you will. That was one of the challenges I think they were having with the Vietnam War, is they were trying to run it from a college logic brain aspect sort of thing. I don't know if that's true or not, but tell me if that's true, or if this is, he was one of that generation. This is the new sort of college people showing up in administrations.
So I think that Dillon is slightly different to that group, but I think that it is it's broadly is true that David Halberstrom idea of the brightest and the best, and that these as you say, kind of to use the phrase of the time, the eggheads, academics like me, people like George Bundy, who came into the administration. He'd been Dean of Arts, I think it was, at Harvard. So these kind of characters come in. And they see how things work theoretically, but maybe they lack that kind of more human level. They tend to be technocrats, people like Robert McNamara. Dillon, I think, is different, though, because he comes from that banking tradition. And of course, the thing about Wall Street is that it doesn't really matter whether things work in theory. For them, it has to work in practice, and they are empiricists because it's all about making money. You can't say, well, I think it should be this, I think it should be that. Because if you do something for the wrong reasons, then you end up losing in the money of the time, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and then you're out on your ear. So, I think Dillon brings that kind of very professional, very pragmatic view to politics. Above all, he is a pragmatist.
There you go. So you've written a lot of great books. You've written about Schlesinger. We talked in the pre-show. One of my favorite first big books I read was 1000 Days, and made me interesting in JFK. And you've written about Eisenhower, the Cold War, Reagan and Thatcher. Difficult relationship. Didn't they have a side thing going on? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's one of the arguments of the book. The traditional way is that those two are always seen. It's like as a political marriage. They loved each other. They never argued. That this kind of thing. And so that other book is arguing. Well, yes, they had a very close political alliance, but they disagree on almost every single issue. And so the book kind of goes through each one of them, showing where they disagree.
Which is interesting because they're both so destructive, I think, a summation would be they're both so destructive to the middle class, or is that maybe true or not?
I think that their relationship is really more about their foreign policy relationship. So it's about the end of the Cold War. So the way in which, for example, Margaret Thatcher is the person who introduces Reagan to Gorbachev. She in effect vouches for Gorbachev, but then when he goes off to Reykjavik and offers the Soviets that, hey, why don't we just give up all of our nuclear weapons? She kind of describes that as like an earthquake under her feet, and just goes completely ballistic with him. I think that it's a really, really interesting relationship between the two.
The Iron Lady, coming to an OnlyFans near you. I don't know what that means. So what attracted you to the Dillon gentleman, Douglas Dillon? What was it that made you go, hey, this is something I want to write about?
Yeah, so I in some ways that comes back to what you were just saying, that like you, I read 1000 Days when I was a child. It was one of the first books really that grabbed my attention. It was up on my dad's bookcase, and at one point I kind of took it down and started reading, and I just almost couldn't stop reading it. It's just such a fabulous story. And Schlesinger is one of the people in that book, and in his diaries and in his letters, and when I was working on his biography, that he keeps talking about Dillon as this really brilliant character. And honestly, he didn't want Dillon in the first place. He tried to persuade Kennedy not to give Dillon the job as Treasury Secretary. He thought it was going to be a disaster. And yet after a year, he describes describes himself as Dillon's greatest fan. So that kind of really intrigued me because, most people, I guess, unless they remember him from the, signing the money, won't really know very much about Douglas Dillon. He's kind of receded into the, just into the wallpaper of that administration. So I kind of felt, why is it that at the time, everyone thinks this guy is so important, a really central character. Nixon wants him at the State Department. Kennedy wants him at the Treasury. Schlesinger turns on a dime about him once he sees him in action. Why is it that this guy who was so important now just kind of seems not to be written up as part of the history?
Did he turn away from the Nixon administration for being appointed?
Well, all I mean is that he was, if Nixon had won in 1960, then Nixon would have appointed him. But because Nixon loses, then Kennedy comes to it. I mean, actually, we've got to be careful not to romanticize bipartisanship. Nixon and Eisenhower were both furious when Dillon took the Treasury job from Kennedy. In the end, they agreed that he had to do it because of the American interest, but they were actually furious at him for doing it. So, sometimes, especially today, on days like today, where we've been watching what's going on in the House of Representatives with Kevin McCarthy and so on, that we sometimes look back and we romanticize the past. There were political rivalries in those days too.
There you go. And for context, people who watch our videos 10 to 15 years from now, Kevin McCarthy was just removed from the Speaker of the House. In fact, he's the first. He just made history as the first House Speaker has been removed.
Yes, and it's an unprecedented act.
An interesting spectacle on leadership and politics. When you want something so bad just to be Speaker, so you can put your name in the history books, that you're willing to sell your soul for anything and anything just to get the position, here's what you get. You made history, buddy. Good job.
And it is interestingly, it is one of the things actually about Douglas Dillon that kind of in some ways gives him a kind of a power, because as the son of one of the richest men in the United States, and with this kind of Wall Street to fall back on, it meant that he could always speak truth to power. That there are occasions when he's in Paris, he writes a memo that says, Eisenhower needs to step up. He speaks quite harshly to Kennedy and to Johnson, because he always knows, if you don't like it, that's absolutely fine. I can go back to Wall Street. So he's not one of those. He's not a professional politician in that way. He's not someone who's always worrying about the next job. You can say what you like about the fact that the money doesn't matter to him, but in that instance, it's something that means that he's always able to maintain his integrity.
I think this is interesting. In 1965, when he left office, the Washington Post, the WAPO, recognized Dillon as by far the best Secretary of the Treasury of the post-war period. You don't see a lot of endorsements like that from the WAPO these days. I think they try and stay more down the middle.
No, I mean, it's an incredible record that he had. It was the longest peacetime boom in American history at that phase. You've got industrial production, personal income, all of these kind of markers of the economy are at all-time highs. Unemployment is an all-time low. Employment is an all-time high. So, in all of these regards, and he brings the marginal rate of tax down from, now just wait for it, Chris. I'm just need to prepare you for this. So he brings it down from 91%. 91% down to 70. So that's the kind of impact that he's having, and that's part of his legacy as Treasury Secretary. I mean, it's hard to believe now that the marginal rate of tax could be 91%.
There you go. Now, was that for the highest earning people?
So, well, the marginal is what you pay on every dollar beyond the kind of the highest rate. But below that, he's also bringing down rates. All of the bands are brought down. So there's an equity and equality about it in the way that he does it.
Maybe that's one of the reasons we felt that was such a good economic era. I think there's a lot of different reasons that mix into that. There was the saved up money from boys that came home from World War II, and the college program the housing program and, Levittown and, how we mapped out America after that. And it was like there was a lot of money that got poured into the people saved up during the war that kind of caused that whole white picket fence, dual car garage sort of era that everyone thinks was so wonderful, but it was such a blip on the screen. It probably wasn't.
The other thing is that it is worth saying, though, is that when he came into office, they were predicting quite a deep recession. So,
really?
This kind of economic performance, I think, is generally regarded. Even people like Paul Samuelson, economist, I think he wins the Nobel Prize. Kind of says that history will. His phrase is something like "history will bow down to the memory of Douglas Dillon." Of course, one of the results of that is what you referred to right at the very start, that it means that all the money is there for the Great Society and also for the Vietnam War. And it's those things that then begin this kind of period of economic difficulty and particularly high inflation that runs through from the late 60s through into the 70s.
There you go. A very interesting thing on politics. I suppose, I don't know. Do we need more money men in business in politics, or do we need more career politicians? Which do you think there's a better way, or is it just dependent from man to man?
I think that politics is actually best when you get as wide a range of people involved, when politics represents society. One of the problems with the professional politicians is that, they tend to all be very similar. I think we've moved away from a kind of an earlier period, and this is not just the United States, but it's, across the Western democracies too, that kind of tradition of working class politicians coming from the shop floor to Congress and kind of representing the interests of the working class, that has gradually diminished over time. And I think that on the other side, you have this sense of kind of politicians constantly having to think about raising money, that politics has become so expensive that it makes it more and more difficult for individuals to kind of stand on their principles, because they're always having to look over their shoulder and think about donors, think about challenges, raising money for campaigns and so on. So I think that what you might describe as the kind of the ordinariness of politics has really declined over the last 50, 60 years.
And rulings from SCOTUS like Citizens United and a few others that made it so you can buy your politicians. You can buy your SCOTUS thing. Evidently now, if you're a billionaire, you can own your own SCOTUS member. Just buy your own judge, really, when it comes down to it.
I think that personally, I think we always have to be careful with kind of one of the other problems around the difficulties with politics is that we're always saying that Washington is broken, that politics is corrupt, that the Supreme Court is corrupt and can be bought. And I think that that kind of degrades the political process as well. That there have been whatever about the kind of the individual cases and individual decisions of the Supreme Court, it's still consistently over the course of American history has been one of the essential bulwarks to defending democracy and the vision of the founders in this kind of division of power. So it's a really, really tricky balance, I think.
And I agree with you. It's well, we throw a lot of jokes around the show and a lot of segues into different things. And sometimes it's easier to do the cheap joke. There are a lot of people, as you mentioned, that pick up on that and they just throw up their hands and become agnostic. They just don't care and they don't vote. And they're like, why should I vote? Because, like you mentioned, there's so much that is bad. But actually, and we talk about this on the show from time to time, the problem is the people who don't vote in this country. And they don't give a damn. And that is the problem, because the people who end up giving a damn, voting and running this country, are the people that, sometimes aren't the best people. And we need everybody in this democracy to take care of it, because it's fragile. and everybody needs to vote, and everybody needs to care, and everyone needs to be involved. I'm a big believer that you get the government that you vote or don't vote for. Even if you don't vote, you have made a choice. And you made a choice for some of the worst people to get into power, because then it's now just up to the parties instead of the average middle America sort of person. So those are my thoughts on it. You get the government you vote for. So if you don't like the people, maybe you should go look in the fucking mirror. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and on that question of people not voting, that so sometimes sure, people don't maybe don't vote because they can't be bothered, but a lot of people don't vote because they don't feel any connection
Exactly.
with politics, that they feel disenfranchised by the political process. That there is, as I say this as an outsider, as a newcomer to the country since 2010, that there is no country like the United States which discusses its politics more, that takes a pride in its politics. It kind of endlessly discusses the political process.
Really?
And I yeah, absolutely. That we're already talking about the 2024 presidential election. It's more than a year away. In the UK, which is a very mature and successful democracy, we usually complain about an election campaign that takes 6 or 7 weeks.
Well, that's right. You guys are shorter in your time.
Yeah, so there's a sense in which kind of Americans are really invested in their democracy. So it's about trying to find a way to take that fascination with politics, that real commitment, but reconnecting with people so that they feel that they have that connection with the political process, with what's going on in Washington. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book about Dillon, was because partly I'm fascinated by this earlier era where there is just more general appreciation and understanding of the political system, where people are able to work across the aisle, where they are a bit more pragmatic about things, where it's quite possible for a politician from one party to work in the government of another party. There are currently no Republicans in Joe Biden's administration. When Donald Trump was president, there were no Democrats in his cabinet. Mike Flynn, the short-lived national security advisor, was the only high-profile Democrat in that administration. So we've moved away from a time where people can work together, can draw ideas from the other side, where they might think that the people on the other side of the aisle are not necessarily their enemy, they're just their opponent.
There you go. Yeah, I always thought that, maybe I watched the House of Lords too much with you guys arguing over there. It's fun to watch the debates in there, and some of the slings that you guys throw at each other in the House of Lords. And so it's kind of fun to watch that politics over there. And I always assume you guys, from watching the House, that I'm like, wow, this their parliament, wow, they must throw around a lot of politics. But I forgot you guys do have a shorter run, as do a lot of other countries, for running for office. I wonder why this is so long. Is it because we're such a huge country and it takes so long to tour around and kiss the babies and shake hands, or are we just I don't know, just obsessed with ourselves because we're Americans?
I don't think it's that you're obsessed with yourself, but as I say, you Americans, it seems to me, are obsessed with politics. That you love politics, you love the game, and that, let's face it, it's not just Americans, is it? We're all, the whole world is fascinated by the presidential election, partly because it's to elect the most powerful person, office holder in the entire world, but also because presidential election is a blood sport. That at the end of the day, you go through this process, you see people that you think are absolutely brilliant just wilt before your eyes, and at the end of the day, it comes down to this kind of gladiatorial combat. Where it's just the representative of one major political party versus the representative, the nominee of the other major political party, and they just go hell for leather at each other, and it just makes for a fantastic vision. But as I say, the United States, for all the faults of its politics, is one of the most stable political and successful political systems in the world. So, something is working. Even when things are not working, something is working.
There you go. And people don't realize that. I mean, we have a democracy that's fraught with all sorts of stuff. Yeah, it's fragile. Yeah, it's still, a lot of people assume that when it says the democracy or the Constitution that we're a perfect union. No, it's that we're moving towards a perfect union, which will probably always be moving towards a perfect union. President Obama said it best: we zig and we zag and we go back and forth, and sometimes we go really back this way and over this way hard, but it's still one of the best things for democracy in the world, and I think the best experiment for the spirit, the idealism of the human spirit. I think what's really, when I used to look at the USSR when I was growing up, I'm kind of dating myself. Gen Xers, Gen Zers are like, what's the USSR? We used to hide our desks.
Us Gen X people have to stick together.
Yeah, we do. The greatest generation ever. But when I used to look at the two of them as an entrepreneur, I realized that capitalism was really about the spirit of the human spirit, the potential that you could do anything and be anything. And the communism was really about just pushing down, controlling and containing human spirit and the ideal. And I think that's why we technically won, or at least I think we won. I guess we have to wait a few hundred more years to see if we won, get as far as the British, 1,000 years down the road. So give us your final thoughts in your book, what you want people to remember, and pick at the book as we go out.
Yeah, so I think there are two things. The first thing is just to kind of be interested in this guy. That this is somebody who made mistakes, yes, but was a really serious figure from the time, and partly because of what happens at the end of the Kennedy administration with the tragedy of the assassination, and then the myth of Camelot, and then we're straight into Vietnam. That he's just been forgotten. So he's an underappreciated figure, but one who I think is worthy of investigation. And then the second thing to take away from it is that this book is an illustration. It's an example of when politics was done differently. And it's not saying that politics was done perfectly during that time. You only have to look at segregation in the South to realize that this was not a perfect society or a perfect political society. Far from it. But there was a way in which politics was done, a kind of pragmatism, a kind of evolving towards social progress that I think is worthy of revisiting, just because it gives such a stark contrast to the way in which our own politics are conducted today.
There you go. We need a little more sanity, more people that are working down the middle. I think this, like you say, this is great that the gentleman's working with both sides of the aisle. We need more of that. And as you said, today when we see the extremists in the House of Representatives literally overthrowing a Speaker of the House because they can't get their way, and being able to do that, I mean, just with 4 votes that they had at their disposal. I think he lost by 6 in the House. I noticed Pelosi abstained, or she wasn't in the House chamber at the time, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was waiting to hear her vote. But the fact that, the extremists of a party can overthrow their speaker is kind of, it's kind of scary, because you're like, geez, we've seen populism rise around the world. I believe, who is it just elected a populist leader in Slovakia? I think just
Slovakia, that's right. And yeah. Italy has a populist far-right leader as well, and Hungary too, Viktor Orban, Hungary.
To be noted, it's the original party in Italy of Mussolini. So there you go. And evidently, a lot of Europe is leaning that way. So there you go. But yeah, it's a scary time in history and interesting. So the more we can, as I said before the show, the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. So please, for the love of God, people, buy history books and learn from them. Thank you very much, Richard, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Give us any .coms you want people to look you up on the internet, please, sir.
Yeah, so it's bard.edu, which is Bard College, and AmericanPurpose.com, where I host the Bookstack podcast.
There you go. Thank you very much, Richard, for coming on the show. This has been really fun, and I'm going to look forward to your book, and I'm going to go grab that Schlesinger book, too. I'm really into that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's really been a blast.
Thank you. And thanks to our audience for tuning in. It's always a blast to have you guys as well. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and Chris Voss 1. Be good to each other. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time. And that should have us out. Lots of